Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for the 23rd in a 34-ish part series as we journey chapter by chapter through Fairy Tale by Stephen King. And we have the full gambit of sections here today. We have a comments section from last time. We have a So What Happened. We have lit crit stuff to talk about, and we have writer's notes. Let's get into it. But real quick beforehand, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. So if you are interested in that sort of thing and you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting that subscribe button to make sure you stick around for more. And if you want to help me out with what I'm doing here on this channel, it always does the trick if you decide to hit that like button at some point in time. And this has been licensed out to Disney. Disney will make the movie of this, and I will review that movie on my personal channel, a link to which can be found in the description below. It is my personal goal to hit 1,000 subscribers before my next birthday. I would appreciate it if you went over there and just hit subscribe, and then ignore everything else I do over there. That's fine. Comments. The question was posed 2 videos ago, and I answered last video. The book I don't think I will ever read, the best book, greatest book, I don't think I will ever read again. And I said Absalom, not because it isn't good. It's just so much work. It's like running a marathon. Freddie chimed in and said that I will never read Lord of the Rings again because, quote, I did my time, end quote. I feel you, Freddie. I read there's a Lord of the Rings series on this channel, just the first book. Not the first book, The Hobbit, but the first Lord of the Rings book. There is a series for that on the channel, and not for me. Should have been a tip-off as for the fact that I would not like this book as well, but I didn't. I'm not very big on fantasy, and every time I read fantasy, I'm sort of reminded why. Not because I hold anything against it. It's just not my cup of tea. Adam chimed in and said House of Leaves is a book that will not be read again. This book used to be suggested to me ad nauseum. I remember when I was getting my undergrad degree, it seemed like anyone who had free time, how they had that I don't know, probably they didn't have to work 40 hours a week like me, was also reading House of Leaves. If I remember correctly, that book was as thick as a Stephen King book. Now here's the thing. I think it is literary fiction. There's a reason a lot of literary fiction is short. A, there's not a whole lot of explaining that has to be done. It's taking place in the world we live. B, gets hard to do. It gets very hard to stomach too much of the same story when we're talking about literary fiction. Adam also said all of this is he thinks is alluding to Charlie fighting Gog Magog. I think that is the conclusion of this. So once we get there, there is some stuff just sort of I'm sure that a battle with Gog Magog is coming. Once we get there, there is some lit crit stuff to do with the Bible. So if that opportunity presents itself, we'll get into that a little bit. But is it the Bible or is it the Torah? I think it's in both. I think. But we'll get there if we get there. But yeah, I think that is probably absolutely the case. That is what is coming. Crybaby Films says, we talked a little bit about the accents thing where you introduce the accent at the beginning of a piece and then let your reader either know that that's what's going on and they will interpret it for themselves, or it's not going to do them any good. In either case, you should abandon the heavy-handed use of accents. Faulkner, Crybaby Films asked, does Faulkner do something like that? Faulkner A little bit, yes. Faulkner does quote unquote misspell words to put them into the accent that his characters were employing, but also one of the things that Faulkner does, for example, there are words, certain places, that don't exist other places. I am from the Midwest. Most people around here do not wash their hands. They wash them. The first president of the United States was not George Washington. He was George Washington. That is a word that you would deliberately misspell, but it is not necessary to misspell that word with accent on it. You just spell it W-A-R-S-H. It becomes indicative of where the word is being used. Likewise, one of the popular sort of words that Faulkner uses is dern. D-U-R-N. It is not darn. It is not damn. It is dern. That dern fish, for example. That is one of the things that Faulkner is, in my experience, best at doing, is the actual lexicon of the characters. Crybaby Films also chimes in and says, have you heard The Thing That Should Not Be by Metallica? Yes, I have. Master of Puppets was my very first Metallica album back when they were cassettes. Now, I don't know why, but that song has always reminded me of Seven Seas of Rhye by Queen, which, by the way, bringing it full circle, apparently Seven Seas of Rhye was written by Freddie Mercury in conjunction with a fantasy novel on which he was working. Interesting. So, what happened in this chapter? Charlie starts putting together pieces of what happened in this world through conversations that he is having with other inmates. And we get on 413 through 414, and this is a bit of an extended quote, so please forgive me. Once upon a time, long ago, the monarchy had a real monarchy with a real army. For all I know, it was a navy, sort of like England was, I suppose, in the days of James, Charles, and the Henry with all the wives. These impish kings of yore, I can't say if there was ever a queen in charge. That's one of the many things I don't know, were supposedly chosen by the high gods. Their rule was unquestioned. They were almost considered to be gods themselves, and for all I knew, they were. It is so hard to believe that kings and maybe members of their family could levitate, strike enemies dead with a cross look, or heal sickness by touching in a land where there were mermaids and giants. Was that so hard? I guess I should have said. I think I put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllables there. At some point, the Gallians became the ruling family. According to my fellow prisoners, that was, you guessed it, many years ago. But as time passed, I'm guessing maybe 5 or 6 generations, the Gallians began to loosen the royal grip. In the time leading up to the Grey, Impus was a monarchy in name only. The royal family still a big deal, but no longer the be-all, end-all. That's sort of like England today, right? Take the Citadel. Doc Freed told me it was run by a council of 7 and the councilors were elected. He spoke of the Citadel as if it were a big important city, but the picture I got was of a small, wealthy town or that prospered on trade between Seafront and Lillimar. Maybe other towns or principalities like Deesk and Ullum, and before Ullum went all gaga religious, were about the same. Each with their own specialty, the inhabitants of which just going about their business. The prisoners, most of whom became my friends, complicated by their belief that I was or might be some magical prince, knew only little of Lillimar, the place, and the palace, not because of the big secret, but because they had their own lives and their own towns to take care of. They paid tribute to King Jan. Double actually thought that it was King Jam, something like you'd spread on bread, because of the amounts demanded were reasonable, and because the army, which reduced by then and named the King's Guard, kept up the roads and bridges. Tribute also paid the some fellows Tom called riding sheriffs and Amit called possemen. These were the words I heard. We get this again. The people of Impus also paid tribute because Jan was Tada, the king, and because folks tend to do what tradition demands. They probably complained a little the way that the people always do about paying taxes, then forgot about it until the Impusarian equivalent of April 15th came around again. Charlie knows an awful lot about April 15th, does he, being 18 years old? Or April 15th, pardon me. What about the magic, you ask? The sundial, the night soldiers, the buildings that sometimes seemed to change their shapes. They took it for granted. If you find that strange, imagine a time traveler from 1910 being transported to 2010 and finding a world where people flew through the sky in giant metal birds, etc., etc. And then over on 415 and 416, King Jan fell ill. His son Robert, who'd always been the favored one, as well as the older two boys, waited in the wings ready to drink from the sacred cup. Eldon, the younger brother, was pretty well forgotten, except by Leah, that was, who idolized him. By all accounts, he was ugly and limping. Not one club foot, but both of them. Warty, too, I heard Akka say. Hump on his back, Fermi said. Heard it was a lump on his neck, Stuck said. It was interesting to me, even illuminating, that they all talked about Eldon and the flight killer as two different people. Eldon was jealous of his brother, and jealousy grew into hatred. All of them seemed to agree on this point, and why not? It was a classic story of sibling rivalry that would have been at home in any fairy tale. I knew good stories are not always true stories, or completely true, but this one was plausible enough, human nature being what it is. Eldon decided to take the kingship either by force or guile, but revenged on his family. If Impus as a whole also suffered, so be it. One thing I'm sure of... Oh, wait. Maybe that is one of the other notes. Oh, no, I've turned too many pages. Yeah. And after that, one day they come back from practice. And after practice, there's a great big guy waiting for them in a cell. And he's kind of a jerk. But he sure is big. And when they mention a tournament, he says he'll win. Then it's broken down for him and us. On 422, we get the description of what will actually happen here. 16 of us will fight the other 16 to the death. No quarter, no crying off. And anyone who refuses to fight will find himself or herself on the rack, or in the maiden, or pulled like taffy candy on the strapado. Claw sat in his corner, seeming to consider. At last he said, I can fight. Yes, you look like you can, when you're not facing the Lord High or spitting up lake water. The 16 fight again, leaving 8. The 8 fight again, leaving 4. 4 becomes 2. Claw nodded. I'll be one of those. And when the other man lies dead at my feet, I'll claim my prize. Then big bad Iota chastises the new big guy, and so the big guy punches his lights out. Punches him in the throat, and he's down for 2 days. That's Iota. That's the big guy. While Charlie is having a dream about Leah, Percy tosses him a midnight snack with a hidden note offering his help in escaping, addressing him as, quote, my prince, end quote. The next day is the fair one. The tournament seedings are posted on the wall, and the final battle of the day is Charlie and Claw. So, let's get into the lit crit portion of this. I want to go back to the very beginning of this chapter on 411. Got a lot of extended quotes in here, so this video is going to be not a lot of contact, not a lot of eye contact. This chapter opens up with this. When I was a freshman at Hillview, I took Latin 1. I did it because learning a dead language seemed like a cool idea, and because my dad told me that my mom took it at the same school from the same teacher, Miss Young. He said Mom thought she was cool. By the time my turn came around, Miss Young, who taught French as well as Latin, was no longer young. But she was still cool. There were only 8 of us in the class, and there was no Latin 2 when I was a sophomore, because Miss Young retired and that part of HHS language program was closed down. On our first day in class, Miss Young asked if I knew any Latin phrases. This is a great humanizing story. This is the type of story, by the way, you get randomly in literary fiction. This is the type of story that getting randomly in literary fiction helps us to understand the characters. In fact, this story itself almost seems like something you would find in the story The Stranger. That is almost how this story feels. You've got a prisoner talking about Mama. But while this is a very literary tune in the middle of this novel, it's out of place. Why is it out of place? It's out of place because we have gotten so little of this. These even are the sorts of stories that can be sprinkled throughout, even when they're completely unrelated to the things that are going on, to humanize characters and to let your reader know your character. But because we've gotten so little of this, as a literary criticism, not only does this seem out of place, but it is so out of place that we're almost tempted to believe that we are supposed to notice this story, as opposed to, in many literary fictions, what happens is, as these stories accumulate in the reader, they slowly take on more weight. They slowly have a larger relevance. So, how does that work? You tell us the story about Mom at the beginning. You tell us a story about how Mom encouraged academics here. You tell us a story in the book about how Mom encouraged Latin here. And it's got a payoff out here with the fact that Latin becomes important to the speaker. What that shows the speaker is that, or what that shows the reader, pardon me, is that the speaker's mother plays a heavy role in his day-to-day world. Maybe not life, but world. In that, the mother character, absent as she may be, in fact, influenced the main character to a great degree. Sorry. Something's going on outside. On page 413, in Dad's AA meetings, beginners were advised to take the cotton out of their ears and stick it in their mouths. Learn to listen so that you can listen to learn. This reminds me, I've been talking a lot about Stoicism lately, of a quote from Epictetus. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. That is every bit as useful a quote as the one that is given to us from AA. And both quotes sort of fit into what it is that Charlie has been doing his entire time as being incarcerated. 416 here. One thing I'm sure of is how he got his new name, talking about Eldon. The butterflies were everywhere in Impus, Doc Freed said. They darkened the skies. And then on 422, I don't know why I highlighted this. Anyway, the name of Flight Killer, because when he came back, the monarchs went away. The monarchs died. There was a plague among the monarchs as well as the people. However it is that this played out, Flight Killer is a pretty cool new name. Flight Killer is a pretty cool nickname. Flight Killer as the new nickname because of Eldon destroying the monarch butterflies. But there's the double meaning there, isn't there? Because in addition to that, he also killed the monarchy itself. He has become a dictatorship. So obviously there is symbolism there to be had. There are all of the little seeds that Stephen King planted along the way with the monarch. Was it a statue? Was it a fountain? I can't remember that he came across that was shattered. So yeah, there's that going on, worth talking about, worth saving for later. And while we talk about saving for later, on 422, we have this, I believe is the second consecutive chapter. Even in this dream, I recognized it for what it was, the final sequence of an animated Disney film. We have Stephen King trying desperately to hawk this book to a production company. It worked. Disney picked it up. But the final thing that I want to talk about, Disney. When you're writing a story that you're calling fairy tale, and you're trying so hard to put elements of Disney in it, well, there's some levels of things that may or may not have purposely or purposefully found their ways into these old stories, like the ones that Disney used to pick up and retell, the Snow Whites of the world, things like that. And we have on page 427 this. On the shelf, there had been 31 buckets for washing after playtime. There were now just 16, because only 16 would need to clean up after the day's festivities. In front of the shelf, propped up on an easel, was a large poster board with "Fair One First Round" printed at the top. Below it were the matchings. I remember them perfectly. I think in such a terrible situation, a person would either remember everything or nothing at all. I apologize for throwing out even more new names, but I must, if for no other reason than those with whom I was imprisoned deserve to be remembered, if only briefly. We talked a little bit about the sort of Third Reich Nazi implications that were going on with some of the ideas that Stephen King was maybe not purposely throwing around, the ideas of genetic superiority, and the genetically superior just happened to be blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Here, we get a little taste of a Nazi-like dilemma. If the Third Reich came to town and told you, would you be told you that you were going to be a prison guard? Would you be a prison guard? If the Third Reich imprisoned you and told you, you are the prison guard, you're a prisoner still, but you have to watch the other people in your wing. And it's easy, isn't it? It's very easy to say no. We wouldn't do that. It's very easy to think of yourself as one of the good people who would be hiding other citizens in your attic, in your walls, under your floorboards. It's easy to think of yourself that way. It's a whole lot more difficult when you start implicating the people you love. It, after all, would not be you who paid the price for getting caught. Not really. You took your actions, and maybe you'd be killed, maybe you'd be tortured, maybe they'd have experiments done on you. Could you stomach that for your family members? You know, these are herein this story, prisoners being put into a mortal combat, put into a fighting tournament, told they have to fight. Do you do that? Because here we are faced only with the prospect of personal torture. But we're weighing that against the fact that there's someone else there willing and able and prompted to kill us as well. To what level do we participate? Here we have Charlie, who in the first round is put up against a guy that we're not expected to like. We are being tethered along to dislike Claw anyway. Here's the real question. Charlie's already started to flex bully muscles. Remember when he caught the guy who had Christopher Pauley? I broke his wrists and sent him over a fence. Kind of liked it. Here, old boy Amit went ahead and roughed us up. And we gave him a whooping. Okay. So the dog is learning a little bit about the taste of blood. Here, with Claw, however it is you say it, Claw, we're being hand-fed a character that we're allowed to dislike enough to watch Charlie kill. Now, what's going to happen in round 2? You've got 32 to 16. In that round of 16, Charlie remembers this, right? Where is it here? He says something about, I remembered it perfectly. I remember the situation. Below it were the matchings. I remember them perfectly. That means Charlie made it through. Charlie makes it through. We know this. Makes it through to what? Charlie has been prompted to believe that he is the chosen one. Okay. How does this happen? Does he kill everyone else in this tournament? Or does he lead a revolt? We don't know at this point. But we are being fed, ironically, juicy little bits that are making us as readers bloodthirsty, aren't we? Charlie is going to get the taste for blood. He's got the taste for violence already. He's going to get the taste for blood. Is this going to, in pit bull fashion, trigger Charlie into being... Nothing is as pleasing as hearing the lamentations of your enemies' women, drive them before you, driving your enemies before you and hearing the lamentations of their women, whatever it was. You know the quote. This is an interesting inflection point for a reader, and I wonder how interesting it was for Stephen King as a writer. Speaking of as a writer, 412. I believe we were taken up to the stadium for playtime every 5 or 6 days, but for the most part, they were just practices and not bloody. The one exception was when Yano, I'm sorry to keep throwing names at you, but you have to remember there were 30 prisoners besides me. John Gardner in The Art of Fiction says that one of the most reliable ways to build a crowd in the minds of your reader is to show us individuals. Probably we would get more out of this if Stephen King had shown us individuals early and simply relied on those individuals. It's hard to say because we did get an entire new cast and crew immediately upon entering this prison. And we kind of know some of them. But at least Stephen King, through his main character, apologizes to us here. I'm sorry to keep mentioning these things, but the penultimate thing I want to talk about here is that Stephen King, in these few chapters since imprisonment, is very unconcerned with what is happening off screen. We keep having to have these dream sequences with radar. And why do we keep having to have them? Because Charlie has been thrown into this prison situation and has absolutely no sense of urgency. One of the things that Kurt Vonnegut said in his 8 rules for writing was that your character should want something, even if it's only a glass of water. Charlie tells us he wants things. He wants to get back to Leia. He wants to meet up with his father again. We're not shown any of those wants. We don't feel any of those wants for Charlie because Charlie has ingratiated himself with this entire sort of imprisoned world. That is leading to the story not having any feelings of stakes. This is one of the things that the Marvel movies oftentimes struggle with, despite the fact that they're uber successful. The characters involved don't really want anything, and because of that, there are no stakes. Because we know that in Iron Man, Iron Man's not going to die. So the only stake left is that Iron Man may or may not achieve his want. Right? That is the only stake at play. Likewise here, we already have Charlie, the first-person narrator, speaking to us in the past tense, meaning that whatever happens here, Charlie made it through. Enough to be able to narrate the story. So he has to have wants. Without wants, We have no real emotive direction for the story. And while we're speaking of Kurt Vonnegut, on page 414, we get this little quote from Charlie at the bottom of the page, the last paragraph. You get used to the amazing, that's all. Mermaids and IMAX, giants and cell phones. If it's in your world, you go with it. It's wonderful, right? Only look at it another way. And it's sort of awful. Think Gog Magog is scary? Our world is sitting on a potentially world-ending supply of nuclear weapons. And if that's not black magic, I don't know what is. That is the most Kurt Vonnegut passage I've ever read in a not Kurt Vonnegut book. It almost makes me wonder if Stephen King was writing this and reading Man Without a Country at the same time. That is one, I mentioned that in the writers section because I think that it's always important to notice who is influencing you while writing a piece. If you can keep in mind the writers that are influencing you while writing something, it is possible to not let that writing influence the actual scope of the book. For example, this book feels sort of Kurt Vonnegut-ish in the mid to later part because Charlie has no drive. That's one of the things that happens in a lot of Kurt Vonnegut books, is characters just sort of wander about and stumble forward. Now, I am not diagnosing this book as having been influenced by Kurt Vonnegut, but it just made me think of those things in tandem. That is all I have for this, the 23rd in a 34-ish part series. We're winding things down now. We are in the last 10 chapters, I believe. There are 32 chapters. And we are on chapter 23, heading into chapter 24. That's all I've got. Next week we'll have chapter 24. Come back, please.